Russian elites are dissatisfied with China's growing influence in the Russian civilian economy and would like to ally with the United States against China in exchange for a favorable agreement on Ukraine for the Kremlin. According to the insider, early versions of the Russian-American 28-point plan to end the war in Ukraine included a proposal to create an alliance between Moscow and Washington to counter Beijing. It is no exception that the plan is supported by President Vladimir Putin. The publication source stated that irritation with China's economic influence is growing among some Russian elites. According to him, Beijing is actively occupying niches vacated by the departure of Western companies, causing discontent in Russian business circles. A source described the proposed alliance as a new Christian coalition. This move was likely aimed at conservative audiences in the US and supporters of the MAGA movement, where the argument for the need to focus resources on containing China rather than supporting Ukraine is prevalent. The publication suggests that this point was excluded from further discussions because it would be politically risky for Moscow to demonstrate a willingness to distance itself from Beijing, one of its key international partners. Furthermore, the article explains why the Kremlin was satisfied with the clause in the peace plan, according to which some of Russia's frozen assets were to be used for the American side's efforts to restore Ukraine. According to the data provided, the US would receive 50% of the profits, and European countries would have to expand the investment pool by adding another $100 billion. A source who shared the first draft of the document with journalists claims that this mechanism suited the Russian elites because it allowed them to retain influence over future economic projects. According to him, oligarchs would still be able to profit from their investments in Ukraine, even despite the formal asset seizure. Earlier, investigative journalist Risto Grozev wrote about the Russian-American coalition's proposal against China in the first draft of the Ukraine plan. According to him, Moscow was attempting to trade peace in exchange for money and a geopolitical deal with Washington. Grozev claims to have seen an early version of the peace plan for Ukraine 6 months ago. According to him, it was a purely Russian concept, almost identical to the current 28-point document, which is being presented as a US initiative. According to a journalist, the draft plan consisted of 30 points, not 28. The first hidden point allegedly assumed that the US and American investors would pull post-war Russia out of recession, as they did in the 1990s. That is, the aggressor country first destroys Ukraine and then expects to be saved from the economic crisis. The second point described the idea of a new Russian-American alliance against China, emphasizing the demagoguery of a Christian union. If this was indeed the plan, Moscow was attempting to trade peace for money and a geopolitical deal with Washington. Grozev is certain that this is a Russian plan, not a jointly developed one. The most controversial parts, in his opinion, were simply not included in the leaked public version. If this is accurate, the current peace plan looks less like an honest path to peace than like a carefully polished Russian document. Only the acceptable points are publicly presented, while behind the scenes the rescue of the aggressor's economy and an attempt to trade Ukraine for a new deal between Russia and the United States remain.
Dominican Republic President Luis Abinader announced Wednesday that he had authorized the U.S. government to operate inside restricted areas in the Caribbean country to help in its fight against drug trafficking. According to Associated Press, for a limited time, the U.S. can refuel aircraft and transport equipment and technical personnel at restricted areas within the San Isidro Air Base and Las Americas International Airport, said Abinader. He made the announcement with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth at his side. Hegseth traveled to Santo Domingo to meet on Wednesday with the country's top leaders, including Abinader and Minister of Defense Lieutenant General Carlos Antonio Fernandez Onofre. It was the first major public agreement that the U.S. has struck with a Caribbean nation as it seeks friendly allies to support its attacks against alleged drug smuggling boats in the region and beyond, killing at least 83 people since the strikes began in early September. Hegseth said the Dominican Republic was a regional leader willing to take on hard challenges. He said the U.S. would respect the Caribbean country's sovereignty and laws as U.S. service members and aircraft prepare to deploy to the Dominican Republic. He did not provide additional details. Meanwhile, Abinader said the scope of the agreement is limited and for logistical operations. The purpose is clear: to strengthen the air and maritime protection ring maintained by our armed forces, a decisive reinforcement to prevent the entry of narcotics and to strike a more decisive blow against transnational organized crime, he said. After the press conference where no questions were allowed, the office of the president issued a statement with more details, noting that several KC-135 tanker aircraft would be present to support air patrol missions, expanding monitoring and interdiction capabilities over a large portion of the maritime and air domains.
En ese marco anuncio al país que hemos autorizado a los Estados Unidos por un plazo limitado el uso de espacios restringidos en la base aérea de San Isidro y en el Aeropuerto Internacional de las Américas para la operación logística de aviones de reabastecimiento de combustible, transporte de equipos y personal técnico. El propósito es claro: fortalecer el anillo de protección aérea y marítima que mantienen nuestras Fuerzas Armadas. Un refuerzo decisivo para impedir la entrada de narcóticos y golpear con mayor contundencia al crimen organizado transnacional.
What is a temporary deployment of U.S. service members and aircraft conducting Operation Southern Spear. Small footprint, temporary, fully respecting your sovereignty and your laws and all the dynamics here in the Dominican Republic. It's a great partnership and truly a joint effort between our two countries against narco trafficking and narco terrorism. I think
Su Excelencia Lía Campos, embajadora de los